is Jocelyn with the studio, and today we are going to be making a Mr. Chips stuffy. Here's what you'll need. A PDF pattern, which is available on our website. Some felt. We're going to be using 2 pieces of tan as our base, and then some brown and black for the details. We'll need embroidery thread. We'll be using 2 colors. Some pins and needles. And 2 pairs of scissors. These are for fabric and these are for paper. The first thing we need to do is cut out our paper pattern pieces. So one piece is just a reference guide. You're going to grab your PDF that has all of the different little pieces of Mr. Chips. And I'll take my paper scissors and begin to cut out all of the pattern pieces. Sometimes when you're cutting, it's easier to work in small sections, so don't be afraid to cut your pattern pieces apart before cutting them out individually. The more you practice cutting, the easier it gets and the more accurate you become. Before we start cutting our felt, it's a good time for you to pause the video and cut out all of your paper pattern pieces. Once you've finished cutting out all of your little pieces, we can start putting them together. By layering your paper pattern, it'll be easier for you to see how your felt pieces will fit together. Mr. Chips, you're already looking like such a cutie. What do you think, Mr. Chips? The next step for Mr. Chips is going to be taking our base color, which is this tan, and we're going to grab this large pattern piece. Take your largest pattern piece as well as 2 layers of tan felt. We're going to put them together and pin it in place. I'll take my fabric pins and just secure the pattern onto my felt. I also want to make sure the pin doesn't go off of the paper pattern, because if it looks like this, I might accidentally cut my pin with my scissors. So we're just going to make sure the entire pin is on paper. That looks pretty secure. Once it's secure, you're going to take your fabric scissors and cut it out. Remember that any point during this video, if you need to hit pause and catch up, go ahead. Now that we have our felt cut out, we will remove the pins. We will take our paper pattern piece and we're going to cut out the black portion of the ears. So grab your paper scissors and we will carefully cut the black patterns off. Once you have your two black pattern pieces, we're going to take our black felt, pin it, and cut them out. And to make this cutting job a little easier, I'm going to cut that off of the big piece of fabric. And again, I switch to my fabric scissors so that I don't dull my scissors. I want my scissors to stay really sharp, so that's why I keep a pair for paper and a pair for fabric. I'll take the extra pieces, put them aside, pull these pins out. So once they're cut out, they're going to look something like this. Now I'm going to take my other black pattern pieces. So I have the top of the head, the little almost eyebrow-like fur, as well as the black eyes and Mr. Chip's little nose. And begin to pin our pieces in place. Pin. And then we'll cut it out with our fabric scissors. Because Mr. Chip's nose is so small, along with some of the other pieces, I'm just gonna hold the fabric in place. I want to be really careful as I cut into some of these details. So take your time, work slowly, and remember you can always correct and adjust once we pull the paper pattern away. So here's the piece. This is looking a little boxy and not super round, so I'm just gonna go in and cut. There we go. So there's his nose. Now to cut some little eyebrow pieces. You also have the option to just use thread to make these little pieces, or you can try to cut out a small shape. And it does not have to be perfect. What's fun about doing dogs or animals is that their markings and patterns are never symmetrical. They have lots of variations and are kind of just funky little shapes. So it will look good no matter what. Okay, so there's one. And I need to make, now it's time to cut the other. I know it's a really small shape, so just work carefully. Try to be accurate, but again, the animal markings are never uniform. So just do your best. Cut and adjust. There we go. Awesome. Last, I just need to do Mr. Chip's two little eyes. So I'll cut off enough fabric for both. And this time, because the eyes are shaped the same, I'm actually just gonna take one, layer my two pieces of felt together, and cut both at the same time. Here are two eyes. Once we finish with all of our little black pieces, we can kind of place them on our base piece so that you can see where they're gonna go. Now, we're going to grab our little Mr. Chip's snout, which is the brown. So take some brown felt and line it up and pin it in place. With our fabric scissors, we will start to cut. And now, if we start layering some more, it's beginning to look a little bit more like our favorite Mr. Chips. After cutting our snout, we just need to take our two little brown eye pieces and cut them out of felt. We can fit them right here at the end. So I will take my fabric scissors and I'm gonna do just what I did with the other eyes. I'm gonna layer them together. Take one and cut around. And now I can just layer the pieces. That gives just a little bit more dimension in our chips. Just take a look at all of our pieces. Mr. Chips is really coming together. Now we need to assemble him. So let's get our thread. I'm gonna start by using this copper thread, and I'll take a big embroidery needle as well. The difference between a regular hand sewing needle and an embroidery needle is that this one has a bigger eye. This is gonna make it easier to thread our needle with our embroidery floss. Take your embroidery thread and pull it out of the skein so it's the length of your arm. This should be a good sized piece to work with. You'll take your fabric scissors, cut it, and something you're going to notice with embroidery thread is that it's very thick. It's not just a single strand of thread, but it's actually 6 put together. So what we want to do is split it. In order to split our embroidery thread, all we have to do is carefully separate the strands, and you'll get 3 on either side. Once you've split it, you can slowly pull it apart. And once you can't pull anymore because your arms are all the way out, you can go ahead and lay it flat. And I actually noticed a little curl down here. It's almost knotted. I'm gonna straighten it out and keep pulling nice and slowly. If you go too fast, it might create a knot and you might get stuck. I have 2 pieces and I'll set one aside for later. Now that I have my thread, I want to make sure that all of the pieces are even. All you have to do is snip the edge, and that'll give you a nice blunt end, and it'll be easier to thread your needle. I'm going to take my thread, pull it so it's barely peeking out of my thumbs, and then I'll thread it. Thread the needle very carefully. This is probably the trickiest part. Here we go. And all 3 strands have made it onto my needle. The way you tie a knot is by taking the long end, making a little loop, and if you just put your fingers together, it should create a loop for you. I'm going to pinch it and tuck the end into that loop. So sometimes this can be a little tricky, but we're just going to tuck it in. There we go. And I'm actually going to do that one more time. This is going to give me a double knot and pull. There you go. Now I can cut off the excess. So I still have my knot. You'll have something that looks like this. And now what we're gonna do is tie a knot, but only on one end. So on our longer end, there will be a knot, and our shorter end is what we're going to refer to as the tail. It'll look something like this. As you can see, all of our pieces are sticking together right now because it's felt, but we want to sew them and secure them. You'll find the 2 layers of tan. We want to go ahead and take off the back piece right now. So we'll set this aside for when we stuff him. Now we want to take all of these details and sew them onto the front. First, I'm going to take my pins and start to secure some pieces down. So the nose and the snout, and I'll do the head as well. We'll start there, and I'm just gonna set aside my eyes, Mr. Chip's little eyebrows, and the ears. Now that I have some of my pieces secure, I can start to sew around them. We're just going to use a basic straight stitch and follow along the curve of each of the pieces. So watch, and then you can try it. Whenever you're sewing, you always want to start on the underside of a project, so the back, because we want to hide the knot. So I'm going to go ahead and start down by the snout. You can really start anywhere, but I'll start right here. And I am just going to connect these pieces. So each stitch is going to come up right next to the last. I want this all to line up too. And this is just to start securing everything. And something you can find is your thread might get caught around your pins. Just carefully move it out of the way. So when I go up, I'm going to pull all the way and then go back into the fabric. And if you want to practice on another piece, if you've never done this stitch before, just take a piece of your leftover felt and you can either draw lines and practice going over those lines, or you can just practice sewing along the edge. As you're sewing, something else you want to be aware of is your tail. As you can see, I still see the end of it, but if it ever gets too close to my fabric, so if it were over here, I can just pull it away. Now I can make it smaller. So I'm going to make a stitch. I'm going to try my best to make them all even, all the same size. And then when I come back up, I'm going to come up right next to it. Almost done with the snout. I think one more stitch. And now, when I pull it, because I finished going all the way around, I'm going to turn it over and I need to make a knot. The way we're going to make a knot is by picking up a tiny bit of felt, pulling, not all the way, but just until we get a little loop, and then I'm going to put my needle through the loop and pull. Now I'm going to do that 2 or 3 times. So that was the first one. Pull, 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 get a little loop, pull it tight. I'll do it one more time. Through the fabric barely, and then through the loop. There we go. And now I can cut off this thread. And I still have it on my needle, so I'm going to take the long end again and tie another knot. So I'm holding them between my thumb and index finger. I'm going to put my fingers together. It will create a loop, and then I just tuck this end inside that loop. I'm going to do it one more time. Tuck the end into the loop, grab it from the other side, and pull. That gives me my new knot. I'll cut off the extra. And now I can keep sewing. The next piece I'm going to sew is Mr. Chip's little nose. I'm going to use the same color. If you want, you can change colors, but I'm going to do the same thing. I started from the underside, and now I'm just going to go all the way around. So up and then down. Carefully pull, move my fabric out of the way. So while I'm using a contrasting thread so that you can see what each stitch looks like, if you wanted, you could use black so that you won't see the stitches. And we're just gonna keep going all the way around. Okay, and now that we've finished his little nose, I'm gonna turn it over again. Something you can notice here is the end of my tail is getting awfully close to my fabric. So I'm gonna tug a little bit on my needle so that this can be a smaller tail. I'm gonna go right through the fabric, make a loop, and go through the loop, pull. Do this one more time. Through the fabric, pull until there's a loop, and then sew right through that loop, pull, and there we go, nice and secure. It's all coming together. Now we're going to sew around the black part of the head. If you don't have enough thread, you can also thread a new piece now. Since I noticed I'm running out of thread, I want to make a knot and start a new piece before this gets too short. So I'm gonna make my knot the same way, through the thread, through the loop. Pick up a tiny, tiny bit of felt, and then go through the loop. Now I can cut this off and I can thread my new piece. Almost, you'll see that only one of the pieces actually went into the needle. So I gotta be careful so that all three pieces make their way in. So I just cut the edge, pinch my thread, and get all three pieces in. Once you thread your needle new, you want to remember you still have to tie a knot on your long end. Through the loop and through that loop one more time. Pull and cut the extra off, and we have a brand new needle to keep sewing. Now I can just start back where I left off. So again, I'm going to start on the back side of the fabric and pull all the way and just continue in this motion of up and down, up and down, trying to get my stitches as even as possible. here's another reminder. If you need to pause this video at any time, go ahead. Now that I have finished sewing on these pieces, it's time to attach the ears. So I'm going to take my 2 ear pieces, put them in place, and sew them on. So I'm just going to position everything, and I'm going to kind of place that little bit of the ear underneath this black piece. Now, while I'm working on sewing the ears on, I actually just want to sew along the inner edge. I'm not going to sew on the outside because later both my pieces will be sandwiched together and I'll sew and secure it. So I'll start right here at the bottom of this ear, and I'm just going to make my straight stitches. So pull, and do that again. I'm just going to keep slowly sewing away at this edge. And I just want to make sure it's lined up all the way. Up, down, up. And you want to make sure you get in both layers as well. Down. And we'll probably just need one more stitch. And we'll do that for now. Tie a knot on the back. Pull, go through your loop. Through the felt, pull, and through the loop. It's a nice knot. Let's tie another knot and do this inside edge. You can always use your reference guide when you're working on your project. So if I want to figure out where I should put some of my stitches or what the positioning should be, I can take a look at this one. So let's take our pieces and place them about where they're gonna go. So we have our little eyes here, and our little eyebrow shapes that are gonna kind of squeeze in right here. I'm gonna use the same brown thread, but again, feel free to change colors. Just gonna adjust this a little bit more. And because these are such small shapes, I'm actually just gonna do 2 little stitches, and that should secure it. So here's 1, pull, and here's 2, and I'm really just trying to make sure I get both ends. So I have up here at the top and right here in the middle. And without tying a knot, because these pieces are so close together, I'm actually just going to reach over to the other side and do the same thing. So one stitch, and here's the second one. Oops. Two. So I'm just gonna wiggle this a little bit more, pull carefully, and then get my second stitch in. Now I can turn it over, tie a knot on the back, and you'll see this is where I connected those pieces. So here's one eye, I went over to the other side, connected the pieces, and I'll tie a knot by making my loops. Great, cut the excess. And now we're here. I want to sew the eyes on, and I want that little highlight, that little glimmer in Mr. Chip's eyes. So I'm going to change my thread to white. I'll take my white thread, I don't need much, and I want to separate it into 3 and 3. So carefully separate your thread and pull. All right, almost done. Keep pulling, there we go. I'll put some to the side and thread my needle again. I'm just pinching it real close, taking my long end, tying a knot. Cutting off the excess. So if you look right here, you'll see that on the side of Chip's eyes, we have this sweet little highlight. So I am going to recreate it by starting from the back and just creating this little ball shape. So I'm gonna do some really tiny stitches right next to each other. 1, 2, maybe 2 more stitches. We'll try that. 3. You already see it's kind of looking like a little circle. I think I'll do 1 more, but it's entirely up to you. And now, great, now that's secured, I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on this side. Just like when I switched eyebrows, I'm not going to cut my thread, I'm just gonna leave it and come up on this side. Go ahead and prep a needle again. So thread it, tie your knot at the end, and we're gonna create our little mouth. Following this shape right here, we're gonna start just under the nose and create a few stitches. Now that we have all of the details on our front piece, it's time to attach the back so that we can stuff it. Go ahead and line your pieces up, just like this, and we're going to create a blanket stitch all the way around. Before using a blanket stitch on Mr. Chips, we're going to take a practice piece. If you've never done it before, this is a great way to get comfortable with the stitch. For my practice piece, I just took some of my scrap felt. I'm folding it and lining the edges up. And the way that we do our blanket stitch is by starting from the bottom, pulling up, and then instead of going back down, we're actually gonna go from the bottom up again. A little loop will form and we're going to pull through the loop. Now we're gonna continue to do this, and if you missed your loop, just pull it back out. And what it's going to create is a little outline, almost like a border for your project. I want to try to space all of my stitches out evenly, but it should look something like this. Pull and then go through that loop. Pull, find the loop, and we'll go through it. So we're just going to continue. I want you to practice this some more until you're comfortable. So up, through the loop. Up, through the loop. And it'll look like that. Let's get started on Mr. Chips. Before I start my blanket stitch around Mr. Chips, I want to pull a new piece of thread. The reason is because I want to have enough to go all the way around without stopping. So I'm going to pull it as long as my arm, and then I'll even pull it a little bit more. Cut it. Now don't forget to separate your strands. If you forget, it will probably be pretty difficult to thread your needle. And the more you practice with embroidery thread, the easier it will be to separate. Perfect. Time to thread my needle. Got it. Tie my knot. I don't want this to be too long, so I'm going to pull my tail some more so that I'm working with a reasonable amount of thread. But I can go ahead and start here. I'm going to start at the top of one ear, work my way all the way around with a blanket stitch, and then before I close it up, once I finish the other ear, I'm going to leave an opening so I can stuff it with my polyfill. So once we know everything is lined up really well, we're gonna get started. So up, up, and through the loop. Pull. Careful that you don't get any knots back here, because if you're going too fast, sometimes that will happen. Pull and through the loop. This is a pretty long piece I'm working with. Pull and then through that loop. Now that I'm almost done with Mr. Chips, I just want to make sure I continue going around the ear carefully, getting both layers as I sew, and I want to make sure not to close him up all the way before I stuff him. So we'll continue our blanket stitch all the way around this other ear, pull through the loop. And you can see my tail's getting really close, so if I pull it, it will be out of my way. So through the loop. So up and through that loop. I'm going to continue. We're almost done here. All right, and now that we have made it to the bottom of this ear, it's time to take some polyfill and stuff. We're gonna take some polyfill, which is nice and fluffy, and we wanna separate it into little chunks. If you try to put too much stuffing in all at once, it's gonna be lumpy, and we don't want that. So you can either take your needle off or barely stick it in your fabric just to keep it out of the way. I'm gonna open up Mr. Chips and start stuffing his little head. I'm gonna start up in the ears, right up here. And again, taking just a little bit, stuff the ear. Now stuff the other ear. You don't want to forget about these corners. So you don't want there to be gaps inside. So if it looks like you could put some more stuffing in, you should probably put a little bit more stuffing. And then, while there's a big hole, we can pinch it, take our needle, and just finish our stitch. So we'll sew up, find that loop, go through the loop, up, through the loop. And now we have a little Mr. Chip stuffy. Some of you know the real Mr. Chips, but for those of you who don't, I thought that it would be fun to have him on. So, Mr. Chips, what do you think about our little Mr. Chip stuffy? I hope you enjoyed this felt stuffy tutorial of Mr. Chips. To find more tutorials and patterns, visit thestudiobakersfield.com.